Hello and welcome into the Gotta Be Saints podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Gotta. Join me each week as I tackle life's most important question: how do I become a saint? Today's podcast is keeping our family safe online. I have with me Michael and Kailash. How are you guys?
Doing well. How are you?
This is part 2 of our conversation. If you have not had the chance to listen to part 1, I invite you to go check it out. Just to give kind of a brief summary of episode 1, I let both of you introduce yourselves, and a really beautiful story. So if that was the only part you listened to of part 1, I think it's worthwhile. But then we just talked a little bit about the internet. We talked about just the beauty of the online space. We talked about some saints. Really a good first episode. And now we're going to get a little bit more into it and talk a little bit even about some of the pitfalls that we see, especially with pornography. But I invite you guys to check out part 1. It was really fun to talk to these two men. But here, before we get started, I just have to quickly shout out our sponsor, which is Good Catholic. Use code GOTTA for 20% off any order on one of their digital series. You guys know Good Catholic. If you listen to this podcast consistently, they are my main sponsor. And secondarily, I want to shout out the Catholic Company, which is actually my employer. They are so generous to me, and they give me a code for 20% off any of their orders. So use code GOTTA for 20% off any of your orders at the Catholic Company, from rosaries to books to clothing to statues. They have it all. The Catholic Company, a one-stop shop for all your Catholic needs. Okay, here we are for part 2. I've now made that podcast plug, and every time I know I should be writing it down, but I don't. And then sometimes I think I sound good, and other times I'm like, man, that wasn't my best stuff. So anyway, on to the episode. The first question I want to kind of bring up is on pornography. We didn't really hit too much on it. We alluded to it briefly in our first episode, but it's a real issue, and one that affects so many people, some of the best people that you and I know probably, or maybe yourself. You know, it can be a real struggle, and the internet is arguably the biggest contributor to that. Now, of course, pornography was prevalent before, but the internet has just made it all the easier to access and to fall into. So I want to firstly kind of hit on, how do we help children avoid this pitfall? And then, of course, from there, how do we help those who are not children, adults who are struggling with it? And you just kind of that whole space.
I mean, for children, just don't give them a smartphone. I mean, like, that's going to solve a huge part of the problem, right? Like, I think one of the major things is that the internet has done, as you said, it existed before, but what the internet is allowed to happen is it becomes very private and easy to keep secret, and you just can't let your kids do stuff like that in private, right? You can't access the internet in private until you're of age and you've built the discipline and things like that. I mean, there's no other way of saying it. You know, that's really it.
Yeah, I have a.
Oh, sorry. I have a friend. My wife and I had our first daughter a little over a year ago, and this couple. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and this couple at our church were kind of very good to us, and they have older kids now, and they were kind of giving us a lot of advice, and they told us this wonderful story about how they disciplined their children. And one of the punishments was they removed the door from the child's room, so the child had no privacy. And I laughed, and it was crazy, but like, that sounds like such a great idea, because it's like, okay, you don't have the right to privacy right now. You know, you've lost that right. And they would take the door off until, you know, the punishment was over, and then they'd replace the door. And so I think that was just a very striking example of what I said about don't let them do this stuff in private.
I was going to share a similar story about a mentor couple that we have, and they have a daughter who is, I think, entering her sophomore year of high school, and it's a private Catholic school, and she's literally the only student that doesn't have a cell phone, and they won't let her have a phone. They said she can have a dumb phone, but she's like, no, I only want an iPhone. So they have this challenge, and she's the only student who doesn't have one, and it's very hard for the parents, but they're very sure that it's the biggest gateway to all these problems is to give essentially exactly what Michael said. If you give someone who is not ready to deal with their own privacy, if you give them this type of tool, it will ruin their life, definitely. And that's like the biggest solution for kids is to not give them that agency that they're not ready for.
Yeah. Well, I know for me, I didn't get my smartphone till I was a senior in college, which I graduated in 2015. So not that long ago, and you know what? It was okay. I survived. So if you're at home and you happen to be younger and just don't have a smartphone, I know it sounds daunting, but you really can live without it. And there are times where I wish I didn't have a smartphone. You know, I wish I didn't have all the things. There are great features. I mean, I'd be lost without Google Maps. Let's be honest. Not that I can't get around locally, but it's great. I mean, there are tools that are on the phone that make it so worthwhile. And yet there are other things where I find myself busying myself by looking at my phone, and I wish I didn't. So, and that's without the pitfall of, what we're talking about here. I'm just talking about general wasting of time. So I think you guys are right that for children especially, it's just don't give them that opportunity. Keep that away and protect them. I think parents sometimes, I'm not a parent. I like I said earlier, I just got married in April, but sometimes we see parents who want to be their best friend of their child, and that's not your role. That's not your task. Your task is to get them to heaven, but to be their mom or dad. And that looks very different. And part of that is saying no to them in ways that they can hurt themselves. And this is a pretty straightforward thing. Do you think that, and of course, now that this is a little bit off track for what we're talking about, but how important is it for the parents to be talking about these things, to be talking about, one, the cell phone itself, what it is a tool and it needs to be used as a tool. But then also just talking about the realities of what could happen with this tool if used incorrectly, or also talking about privacy just in general.
I had a friend who said, if you don't teach your kids, someone else will. And I think with it, when it comes to how they spend their time online or how they live in this digital world, it is absolutely important that we teach anyone who we have this responsibility for, children, I think in some regards, even parents, like we must teach them how to live online and maintain Catholic values, because otherwise you'll get these default values of the world, which is basically consume as much content as possible, spend as much time online as possible, live online as much as possible. And that means pornography and music, which is also very detrimental to the soul. I mean, we target pornography because it is a grave evil that is distinctly very bad, of course, but like, I don't think it's actually very sanctifying to listen to a lot of music, which is produced now as well. I don't think it's that sanctifying to watch most of these television shows that we see that, promote values which are contrary to ours. Even just to the idea that you see people have premarital sex on TV, like that's very, very common. And those values are also contrary to what we believe. So I think you must inculcate the value and decision-making on your own, because even like the most tertiary shade of morality that you'll get online is very bad.
Yeah, what Kailash said is, it's a hard thing to hear, but he's totally right. I mean, pornography gets a lot of attention because if we're going to equate it to drugs, it's like the heroin, right? It's like the bad one, right? But there's a lot of things that lead you there, and that we kind of turn a blind eye to and we don't pay attention to. and music is a great example. You know, I have this, my wife makes fun of me, but I get songs stuck in my head all the time, and it drives me up a wall to the point where if we go into a restaurant and they're playing music I don't like, she knows now. She'll turn to me and she's like, "We'll leave, don't worry." And so we don't go in because the songs will keep me up at night. And what I realized once I started, after my conversion and I started attending mass, I realized that the sung mass, when those get stuck in my head, it's a prayer that's bouncing around in my head, and it's wonderful. And if you think about what's bouncing around in our heads, this cacophony, at its best, it's a cacophony, but in reality, a lot of the messaging is horrific, and that's bouncing around in your head, and you're repeating this over and over again, whether you like it or not. And so I don't mean to pick on music, but I think to Kailash's point, like pornography gets a huge amount of attention, but there's a lot of other things that surround it that should be avoided. And the other hard thing that I'm going to say that a lot of people don't like to hear is it's not so much about the talk that you have with your kids, it's about what they see you do, and how they see you use technology. So my wife and I are both software engineers by trade, and so we know how the sausage is made, and so to speak, and so we have a strict rule that like our daughter cannot see us. She cannot see a screen. Period. Like a screen, it has this ability to captivate you, and just grab your attention, and it's overstimulating to the point where we don't want her to become so overstimulated by that's the only way that she can be entertained. And so we have a very, very hard, strict rule that like if we use our phone, we try to do it away from her. And we do not let her see a screen, whether it's a television, a computer, or a phone, or an iPad, whatever. And that takes work for us to do, but we strongly believe in that. We want to give her the gift of being able to be stimulated by the subtle things and to hear the still small voice of God. So I know that doesn't address pornography, but I'm trying to address the things that surround it that I think are more important to begin with. If your kid's addicted to cocaine and you try to tell them don't do heroin, it's going to be really, really hard, right? But if you stop it before it gets to that point, with all the little things, it's going to be much easier to have the conversation about the really big topic of pornography.
Yeah. Well, I think growing up, I remember, my parents especially being so strict with what we could watch, where we'd go over to a friend's house and I had to ask what we were watching. And then I had to call them and say, can I watch this? And I remember in 8th grade, I was at a friend's house and they wanted to watch Tommy Boy. And I knew my dad was not going to let me watch it. Now, granted, Tommy Boy is mild in terms of its inappropriateness. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's definitely some scenes that are not good, but there were much worse things, and yet I knew I can't ask my dad, so I watched it, and I felt terrible, and that was good for me that I was raised that way, where I knew that I shouldn't be doing these things, and that had been, established in my psyche from a young age that I need to be accountable for. I need to be aware of what I'm watching and try to consume the right thing. Same thing with music. We had an obnoxious amount of Christian music on in our house growing up, to some of them, songs that I listen to now and I'm like, oh, if I ever hear that song again, I'm going to lose it. But at the same time, it was so much better than, what's on the radio today. I fortunately don't listen to the radio, so I don't know when Lizzo makes her new song that's disgusting. Sorry, Lizzo. Maybe, God willing, you'll get to heaven. I hope and pray. But these songs that are so just atrocious, and yeah, they have, like you said, both of you said, they have an effect, and it starts with one, those discussions, but then two, what you're saying, just living it out in your own example. I mean, I've had people say to me, would it have been helpful, or is it helpful to have these discussions? And I look at my own life. My parents did not talk to me about drugs. They didn't talk to me about sex. They didn't talk to me about pornography. And fortunately, I mostly avoided all of those things, other than pornography a little bit, and, never did drugs and wasn't having sex and wasn't drinking underage. But that was a gift. I mean, that was the grace of God, but it was also the example my parents showed me that they weren't doing any of those things ever, and they lived holy lives. And that example was essential. So I think it's probably a
So
both.
that's.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to say that brings up a really, really good point, which is our culture is so fixated upon erasing guilt and shame. And yet those are useful things. It's useful to feel guilt. It's useful to feel shame to prevent us from falling into sin, right? And your example of not wanting you knew your dad was going to say no, or that later example of how you were able to avoid these things despite your parents never having that talk. I'm guessing it's largely because you didn't want to disappoint your parents, right?
It started with that. Eventually it led to not wanting to disappoint God. But yeah, the starting point was, I don't want to disappoint mom and dad. I mean, nobody was more important to me than my parents and their approval.
But that's in the act of contrition, right? Forgive me, Father, for I've sinned. And it's like, because I fear the pains of hell and the loss of heaven, but most of all, why most of all? Because I've offended you, right? And my father, right? And so that relationship we have with our parents of not wanting to disappoint our parents, that truly loving and respectful relationship. It's not friendship. Hey, my mom's cool. She lets me do this. She buys me beer or something. No, like it's a respectful, loving relationship where you don't want to disappoint your parents. That segues beautifully and by design, I think, right into our relationship with our Heavenly Father, and so beautifully encapsulated in the act of contrition.
I like that. It's good. It's a good way to think about it, and actually just to reflect on the act of contrition is something I probably only do during confession when I say it, but it's probably a good prayer to look at more often, even, part of an examine. I'm sure it wouldn't be bad for me to be doing. So I appreciate that sentiment and that thought process. Do you guys have anything more to say on that, or should we bop to the next question?
Go ahead.
Okay. So this is to go along with what we've been talking about, but in your opinion, do you think the church could do a better job about speaking on pornography and masturbation, but also just the pitfalls of technology with all of these areas? Or do you feel like in your communities this is done well?
I have a very strong feeling about this. So I don't know if you're familiar, but there is have you ever heard of the National Legion of Decency?
No, I have not.
Okay. So yeah, it was
sounds like decent people though.
Yeah, no, it was a Catholic organization in the United States whose role and responsibility was to evaluate forms of entertainment, whether it movies or music, and they had the support of the bishops, and they basically would have Catholics ban. They would not go see things that were risque or contrary to Catholic morals, and it was a very powerful organization. And you can look it up. It's very fascinating. The amount of influence they had over what movies would be made and the content that would go into those movies. And in 1980, it was disbanded. So yes, the church can do more. The church has done more, and the church should do more. And the Legion of Decency, or some 2022 version of it, should be reinstituted. And that was back when the church had the moral authority. Unfortunately, today, because of all the scandals and everything, the church is hurting for moral authority. And so, it's going to be, I think a lot of people would laugh if a similar organization like this were to be established today, but who cares, right? Like St. Paul says, be a fool for Christ. If people revile you, great, all the better, right? We need to do these things despite people laughing at us. Like, not giving, I'm sure, as Kailash said, that family who doesn't give their daughter a smartphone, she's the only kid, I'm sure she gets laughed at and made fun of, and the parents are viewed as backwards and old-fashioned. They're sticking to their guns because it's the right thing to do, and we need to have spines. And as a church, we need to have a spine and reinstitute organizations like the National Legion of Decency. And, if the majority of Catholics, roll their eyes at the content recommendations and things like that, fine. But there's going to be a portion who do adhere to it, and there's not only will there be a portion who adheres to it, but it's on the record where the Catholic Church stands. right? And I think that is part of the damage done today, is we don't know where the church stands on a lot of things publicly.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think absolutely things like the Legion of Decency, which it's a solved problem. It was done by the church in the past. It should be done again. Sorry, I was like passionate about that, but yeah.
No, I remember this was probably stopped a couple of years ago, but the bishops' conference used to rate movies, and they would rate them based on, you know, a certain scale, and the last was morally offensive. And so I remember, you know, it'd be basically saying like general audiences, anyone can watch. Maybe you guys know what I'm talking about, but there was a lot of movies that I wasn't allowed to see because my dad would go look and it would say morally offensive. And I remember Underworld with Kate Beckinsale. I was not allowed to see. I think I did see it at some point when I was a little older, but did not see it when I was little because my dad's like, you're not seeing that. That's a terrible movie. I think The Matrix wasn't rated well. And so there was a few that I was like, all right, this is a little over the top, but some of them, I think they did a really good job. And I was allowed to see Lord of the Rings because of that rating. So I was thankful for some of them, but I know what you're talking about, that we need to have things like that in place that are, you know, like you said, the moral authority of the church needs to be spoken. Sorry if you have, I don't want to take away your opportunity to speak.
No, I think it's really it's very simple. I think the beauty of our Catholic Church is that it does exist in the world today, and we are able to we're able to receive new teaching and new guidance as the world changes. And that's really what the Lord intended by establishing a church which would exist until the end, is that it is meant to be involved in these aspects of our lives as things change.
Yeah. Well, the next question I had for you, we kind of already hit on. We talked about the, you know, how important is it for families to be talking to their kids about the harms of the internet. So we can kind of skip over that, and then we talked about cell phones, and if a child should have a smartphone, if ever. We kind of hit on that too. So the next thing I want to ask you guys, and I think this will be a question that hopefully is a softball for both of you, but what are some helpful tools to curb all these pitfalls?
I'll let you take it, Michael.
Shoot, I was going to hand that one over to you.
You guys can both share. Don't worry.
Yeah, obviously, you know, we've started a company called Fidei, which means faith in Latin, and it is technology for the faithful, right? And so we started with email as a service, and we're offering, and that's to individuals and to organizations, and now we're offering file sharing, collaborative document editing, like you could be editing the same spreadsheet at the same time and stuff like that. And so we've got parishes and Catholic organizations using this, and so these are tools, you know, that we provide that are alternatives to what you might buy from some of the big tech companies, and it's really, we made a conscious choice to choose to make these sorts of tools, which gets back to, you know, I think it was on the first podcast where we discussed like technology being a tool to help you achieve an end, which is derived from your Catholic morals, and ultimately your ultimate purpose is the greater glory of God, right? So you're using tools, technology, to help you achieve those ends. And we chose to focus on making tools because they allow you to pursue those ends in a way where you don't have to worry about the morality of the company supplying it. And we chose to make tooling rather than social network or things like that, because we like how tools allow you to get in and get out, right? Use the tool to achieve the end, and then you're done with it. It doesn't encourage a certain sort of behavior, that we think that a lot of technology these days sort of falls prey to. It encourages you to act in a certain way, and it incentivizes certain behaviors. And so we really tried to stick with like pure tooling. So yeah, Kailash, I'm sure you can say it more eloquently.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's super important for Catholic organizations, Catholic business owners, Catholic families, or parishes, nonprofits to consider is like, this kind of revealed itself as we started to get more users in these different products that we've made, that if you give your business to Microsoft, or if you give your business to Google, say, in some ways they're going to make your life worse. They're going to make your mission as a Catholic person in this world harder to achieve, because they spend your money, or they spend their influence on moral anathemas, basically, and things which are making it harder for your children to be Catholic, or making it harder for us to practice our faith. And I think what we discovered as we provided more options, finally another option is, you can do business with us, and we're not going to make it harder for you to practice your faith. And as best as we can, we're going to make it easier by doing our tithe, or contributing to these Catholic nonprofits or parishes that we work with. And I think that we are impressed. I'm surprised, I should say, that we've actually been able to get to a feature parity, that you're able to sort of do the same work that you were doing elsewhere with us. And we want to see more and more Catholic alternatives come up for these important tools, because it's really important that you can do business with someone that isn't going to make your sanctification journey harder. And I think, in whatever, you can call it a microscopic way, or you can call it a remote way, a faraway evil, these companies that are in Silicon Valley or in the West Coast, they do make our lives harder in whatever way that they do. And I think it's very important, whether it's Fidei or other alternatives that you find, that you do business with people online who aren't going to make your life harder as your sanctification journey is going.
Yeah, a very visible version of what Kailash is saying, and I like to say that my dream is one day we have emoji that, instead of a rainbow flag, there's a flag with the Sacred Heart on it, right? Instead of like just random beads, there's a rosary. Instead of a magician, there's a priest or a religious sister. Instead of an orb, some like weird orb thing, I don't know what that emoji even means. I guess it's like a ball, that crystal ball. Crystal ball, I guess that's what it is. Right? Instead of that, we have an altar, right? Like, what would the world look like if we said no to these things, and we started creating our own? And that's kind of what Kailash and I are trying to do, right? I mean, how cool would that be if we grow up and there's the Sacred Heart emoji? I mean, that'd be awesome. And there's subtle, insidious ways that these companies really infiltrate our children's minds, essentially. I mean, try going on the App Store in June. I mean, just don't do it, right? Unless you want to be angry, right? So it's really hard. And like Kailash said, if you keep patronizing this, and look, they create useful tools, right? And that's what we're trying to do is try to make it so that we've got, like Kailash said, feature parity, so you can use alternative tools. And like Kailash said, it's not just us, we want to encourage others to do the same thing, so that there can be alternatives, and we don't have to support these organizations who are directly working to undermine Catholic values.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And it's sobering to recognize that, that this needs to, to just recognize what these companies are doing to harm our children and the people out there. But then the beauty is, there is a billion Catholics on this earth, like, we have the ability to change the way that our society works if we are faithful to what we believe and know to be true. But it's going to take all three of us and everyone else to do their part in this task. And so I thank you guys for what you're doing. I know that's a monumental, and probably at times it seems like a daunting task of trying to change how we use in the world and the industry with the tools that are present there on the internet. But if not you, who? And so it's a gift that you guys are doing what you're doing. I want to provide you guys the opportunity just for final thoughts, so that we can wrap up here. But this has been a great conversation, both parts. I've really enjoyed talking to both of you, and And I hope that this podcast can get a little traction for both of you, but want to give you that opportunity for any final thoughts on what we've talked about in the last 2 episodes.
I would say to think about got to be a saint. Being a saint is about choosing out of your will. And whether it's the businesses you work with online, or how you interact with the internet, or how you choose to use this new tool that we've made, the internet, it's really about the act of our will to be able to choose what we do in a way which is ordered towards Christian principles. And I hope that you can look at us at Fidei and see that this is one way that you can kind of use your will. But certainly I hope that you can take a look at how you work with technology or you consume content online and act in your will, because that's really the pathway to sanctity.
My final thought, I guess, would be that we're called to be in the world, not of the world, and really just go back to basics. Every time you're using some sort of technology, ask yourself, what's problem is this solving? Is this helping me get to heaven? Probably not. Is it helping me get a job done that is helping me get to heaven, fulfilling my vocation? Maybe. In which case, use it, right? But use it to that end.
Yeah. Well, thank you, guys, both of you. It's been great. I want to ask you my final 2 gotta be saints questions. These are some of my favorites because it's always just fun to get people's different responses. But first question is, who is on your Mount Rushmore of saints? So I know Mount Rushmore has 4 heads. If you've got 10 favorite saints, that's fine too. The Catholic Church is so big, we can just get a bigger mountain. So who's on your Mount Rushmore?
I could give 4. Go ahead, Michael.
Right.
Go ahead.
You go, Kailash. I was just going to rattle them off, but you go.
I'm very fond of the Carmelite order. So St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, and St. Therese would be there. I got this very random saint that a lot of people don't know. His name is St. John van Ruysbroek, and he's a 1300s mystic from the Netherlands, that area. He's super interesting, and I've been reading him lately, so he would be on there now. We'll see how I would feel in 50 years, but probably the 3 Carmelite doctors and this mystic, though. But there's many Carmelites that I love. So,
well, I'll have to check him out. I mean, I do love the saints. My sweatshirt, for you guys can see it. There's the saints right there. They're kind of my favorite. So I've never heard of him though, so I need to look him up.
I'd say St. Pius X. He speaks on modernism, which is very apropos to our discussion today. I would encourage everybody to read Pascendi Dominici Gregis. I think it really is a masterpiece of an encyclical speaking on a lot of the errors that we see today. The St. Thomas Aquinas, I mean, I have Kailash has a Carmelite influence. I have a very, very strong Dominican influence. So St. Thomas Aquinas. And then I would say St. Catherine of Siena. My daughter's name is Siena. We named her after St. Catherine. And St. Anthony of Padua, who this will be a story for another time, but he saved my life as a child. And I learned this after my conversion. And he's just a wonderful saint and a joyful saint. And then because Kailash threw in a medieval mystic, I'm going to do the same. I'll throw in Saint Hildegard von Bingen, who I think has a lot to offer to our world today. And she was a incredible mystic, but a polymath. I mean, she had visions of the cosmos and how the cosmos work. She was adept at, she wrote sacred music. She was adept at herbalism and using natural healing methodologies. She was just incredible.
Yeah. One of the 4 female doctors of the church. She's great. All right. Well, my final question for both of you is, God willing, one day you'll both be saints. What are you going to be the patron saint of?
Wow. No, I'm too humble to answer, unfortunately.
Oh, come on. Answer the question.
I would love to be the saint of the lay vocation. I don't know if that exists, but I would love to live the most holy lay life that I could, and it would be the lay vocation.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It should be all of our desires, but I like it. Michael?
Yeah, I guess something along the lines of what Kailash said. It's really hard to answer. I mean, I don't view anything of what I do as like particularly, or any of my interests as like particularly like worthy of sanctity. I think like we're judged according to our vocation. Right? My vocation is a husband and father. So if I could be a patron saint of, I mean, Saint Joseph is already though. So I mean, you're never gonna supplant Saint Joseph. So I don't know, right? Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to be remembered. If I am a saint, I'd like to be remembered of fulfilling my vocation.
All right. Hey, that could be it. Fulfillments of living accordingly to what God wants. Well, thank you guys, both of you. This has been a lot of fun and really helpful. And I hope that to the listener at home that you got something out of our conversation today, and check them out on the internet. I'll, like I said, put your guys' website in our show notes. So Fidei will be plugged. But thank you so much. And thank you for anyone who's at home listening. Remember, our sponsors are Good Catholic and the Catholic Company. Check them out in our show notes as well for the websites. But without further ado, have a great day and God bless.
Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, click to subscribe. This is a Good Catholic podcast. Visit goodcatholic.com for more information.